Welcome to Your Changing World. Hopefully you're standing in the middle of the meadows in the wonderful city of Edinburgh. Otherwise, perhaps some of what I have to say may not make a lot of sense. Today, I want to explore ideas of changing landscapes, how landscapes have changed in the past, how we can play a part in changing the landscapes of the future. As you no doubt know, how we live and consume is affecting our climate, which in turn is affecting how we live and consume. Those changes are having some unwelcome side effects. Because of this, we're all keen to rebalance our relationship with nature. The changes in climate have highlighted the connectedness between humans and nature, that we are in fact an integral part of a global ecology, one that connects the circulating masses of the air, the vast oceans of the world, and the land masses on which we live. No surprise then that there's an ever-growing discussion about how we can live in a more sustainable manner. That's a big word. It means different things to different people. It's about avoiding running out of natural resources. Yes, in protecting those resources, we need to utilise technology, we need to minimise waste, we need to change the way we live. And these are all ways of making our world a more sustainable one. When it comes to exploring ideas of sustainability, the city provides a particularly interesting case study, and it's really worth the effort of making cities more livable spaces. The United Nations estimates that nearly 70% of the world's population will be living in urban areas by 2050. So with that thought in mind, we should give careful thought to a city that is future-proof. So I wonder what your ideas are of the perfect city. Does it include ideas of sustainability, of e-vehicles, integrated public transport, energy-efficient homes? What ideas do you have for designing a city that's enjoyable to live in, does not impact on the environment, minimises waste, and is accessible to all? Perhaps you'd like to live in a really green city. Copenhagen in Denmark is often described as the city that's most climate friendly. Perhaps you see technology as being essential to cities of the future. That prize goes to Singapore. What about the role of the city in ensuring your health and well-being? Well, you're standing in it. Did you know that in 2020, Edinburgh was named as one of the world's top 20 cities for well-being? Look around you and into the distance towards Arthur's Seat. This wider landscape is the result of volcanic activity that took place over 350 million years ago. And more recently, just 20,000 years ago, of intense glaciation. In fact, the areas immediately around the meadows sit upon a set of ridges that were formed from glacial processes. Step forward again to just 9,000 years ago, and the spot you're standing on would have been part of a vast Caledonian pine forest. But climate doesn't stand still. The warmer, wetter climate that followed led to the establishment of mixed deciduous woodlands made up of oak. So just a few thousand years ago, the meadows was part of a vast woodland of oak. Okay, step forward again, this time to the 1600s. Some of the earliest records of the meadows describe it not as a piece of ground, but as an extensive freshwater loch. And at the time the Burloch was known, was the main freshwater supply for the whole of the city. And if you'd been standing here in the 1650s, you would have detected the faint whiff of death. As with many of European cities, Edinburgh suffered intermittently from the plague. Confined by its defensive walls, cramped 11-storey buildings, its squalor and rat-infested conditions created an ideal environment for the bubonic plague. The meadows is where plague victims were sent and buried in so-called plague pits. Jump forward again. In 1886, the meadows was home to the Great Exhibition, opened by Prince Albert. The International Exhibition of Industry, Science and Art was a sensational spectacle, held in a majestic collection of tented buildings. It included powered looms, bakeries, hot drink dispensers. In fact, if this was 1886, you'd be standing in that exhibition centre right now. All that's left of it today is a sundial mounted on a column of stone at the eastern end of the meadows. During the war, the meadows was carved up into allotments, and as recently as the 1980s, you would have found sheep grazing in the meadows. In 1989, the meadows was the site of the first public science festival. Special guest was Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman in space. But in this instant, what you see is the now. What you can't see is all of those past landscapes, and neither can you see the future. But you can imagine. Once this was a wilderness, part of a great oak forest. How would that fit with your ideas of a city of the future? This reimagining of the city is an empowering and exciting idea, and the past shows us that the city never stands still. Just as it's been many things in the past, so it can be many things in the future. What do you want to do with this landscape? You can imagine the meadows as anything you like, not just a place for humans, a place for nature. Perhaps you can imagine the meadows as a vast wetland, a wilderness of trees, plants, herds of deer and wild pig, overgrown, full of bugs, insects, heron and hedgehog. Or perhaps you like the order of this manicured monoculture that sits in front of you right now. Perhaps it could be a mix of landscapes. You can already see how these ideas are being explored through the community garden next to the playground and the planting of wildflowers on Middle Meadow Walk, each an example of how communities can influence the creation of more sustainable cities. Sustainable not just for us, but for all the ecologies with which we are so deeply connected. Hopefully, I've shown you how city landscapes can change. Perhaps they need to change in the future, and I hope you can in some way be part of that change.